So far, this week has been mostly much the same as last week. Still in the Home Depot account. Still being sent mostly to the same places, kept within the same region. Still being sent more stuff to offer up in prayer than stuff to be excited about. Tonight I had a fair amount of time to relax after I finished. But that's only because I had a whole bunch of delays today, which kept me from making the delivery or the pickup that I was supposed to make this afternoon. So now I have to wait here until the place reopens at 8 in the morning to make that pickup. But I still have some time to be able to tell the next part of my life story and still get a decent amount of sleep tonight. So when I left off last time, I was talking about how I began the process of my vocational discernment and how I initially felt very strongly called to diocesan priesthood. Around the same time I started discerning priesthood, I also started to work on the greatest leadership role that I had in college, which was planning and leading Drexel Newman's alternative spring break trip for my junior and senior years. In case you've never heard of alternative spring break, it's a type of community service trip that colleges offer during their spring break week as an alternative to going to the beach and getting drunk. These trips had two huge impacts on my vocational discernment. The first impact came from Christian Appalachian Project, which is the organization in Kentucky that Drexel Newman works with on our ASB trip every year. And every year they give a presentation to their college spring break volunteer groups to recruit applicants for their year-long volunteer program. Before I sat through this presentation, I never gave any serious thought to doing a year of service after graduation. After that first of two spring break trips to Kentucky that I led, I realized that if I wasn't going to enter the seminary straight out of college, I wanted to do a year of service. The second big discernment impact came from planning all the travel logistics for these trips. The experience made me realize how much I love planning and going on long road trips, even more than the purpose of the trip in some cases. That's not to say I didn't enjoy the service and community building aspects of ASB. I loved them too, but I didn't obsess over them in the months leading up to the trips like I obsessed over every little detail of planning the road trip to and from Kentucky. Now, while I'm talking about traveling, I'm going to intentionally go off on a tangent and tell you why I decided to memorize the names of every county in all 50 states. My quest to memorize county names began a couple months after I turned 21. One night, as I was reveling in the awesome feeling of being 21 and admiring my horizontally oriented Pennsylvania driver's license, I felt intrigued reading the names of all the state's counties and the hologram on my license. I can't remember my exact thought process. It may have just been because it was Christmas break and I had nothing better to do. But something made me want to memorize all those county names from my home state. So I found this website called Sporkle that features quizzes for naming the counties of every state, and I just kept doing the Pennsylvania quiz on there until I had them all down. Then I also memorized neighboring New Jersey's 21 counties because I have family over there and spent a lot of time there as a child. And I already knew all of Delaware's counties because it's so close to Philly and there were only 3 of them. My first ASB trip to Western Maryland in my pre-junior year, the year before I started leading the trips, inspired me to memorize all the other states. Seeing the signs with the name of every county we passed through on the way there and back lit my sense of wanderlust on fire. A little over a month after that trip, I decided I was going to begin memorizing the counties for every state, and 3 months later, I could list each state's counties in alphabetical order with no hesitation at all, as you've seen in some of my videos as I cross the state border for the first time. The following year, I also memorized the locations of every county on every state's map, but I've only retained that memory for a few states, like the states I've lived in, and states that have so few counties that it's easy to remember them. But for the most part, I've only remembered the county names for all 50 states, because keeping all the locations memorized just would have taken too much mental effort and practice at a time when I had so much schoolwork to do. Hopefully, my trucking travels will help me to iron more county locations into my long-term memory. Not too long after that first Kentucky ASB trip, I searched the Catholic Volunteer Network online database, looking for year-long volunteer programs that I might want to do after graduation. I found several programs that looked like they might be worth applying to, but only one immediately jumped out to me as exactly what I would want to do if I didn't enter the seminary. It was Spiritus, a youth ministry and retreat team in Wisconsin, as I've talked to you about a lot before already. I knew that I wanted to do Catholic ministry work to encourage others to find authentic joy in Jesus, just like I did. And Spiritus was one of the only volunteer programs I could find that offered the opportunity to evangelize rather than just do human services work. That's not to say I don't think human services work is important. Obviously, the corporal works of mercy, secular education, and everything else that falls under the category of human services are important, but I've never felt God calling me to do that kind of work. Even if I did, I got the impression that Spiritus would be more conducive to developing my own spiritual life than any volunteer program that is run by a Catholic organization but does ministry work of a non-religious nature. My preliminary research suggested that Spiritus had a very strong faith-focused community life, while certain other Catholic volunteer programs didn't. I wanted to live in community with teammates who would support each other's spiritual growth and work together every day rather than working at different placement sites and only seeing each other outside of work. Spiritus offers all of that, and unlike another program that does almost the exact same thing, Spiritus doesn't impose a personal fundraising requirement on its team members, and it pays a pretty generous stipend. I don't have the entrepreneurial skills or the networking connections to raise any substantial amount of money, so I immediately crossed any programs with a fundraising requirement off my list. As excited as I immediately got about the possibility of joining Spiritus, it was still initially plan B behind entering the seminary. I still felt very strongly that I was called to the priesthood, and I was eager to begin the seminary application process as early as possible in my senior year at Drexel. The Archdiocese appointed a new vocation director that year, and when I went to meet him for the first time, he immediately became concerned about my Asperger's. For those of you who aren't familiar with the process of becoming a diocesan priest, the vocation director is a priest appointed to vet and provide discernment guidance to all the men interested in entering the seminary for his diocese. As the main gatekeeper of the seminary application process, one of his jobs is to ensure that men appear to be well qualified to begin priestly formation before they're allowed to begin the application process, because if an unsuitable candidate is allowed to start the application process, it wastes the bishop's precious time, and it costs the diocese money. So it was out of an abundance of caution that the new vocation director wanted to find out more about my Asperger's. Initially, he wanted to meet some of my friends and me for lunch or dinner to see how I functioned in a group social setting, but we were never able to schedule that. When I met with him a second time, he told me that he had decided he wanted me to spend at least 2 years working full-time before he would consider letting me apply to the seminary. Normally, when I'm turned away from a job or something I really want to do for a living, I get pretty upset. But this time, I was not disappointed. I was excited about the possibility of moving to Wisconsin. Until then, I had never been away from the Philly area for more than a week at a time, so The thought of getting to move to a new part of the country, to live with other devout Catholics my age, and talk to young people about my faith journey was more than I could ask for. I was so excited about it that I had already submitted my Spiritus application over 3 weeks before the vocation director even told me that he wasn't going to let me apply to the seminary. Now all I had to do was apply to a few other year-long volunteer programs as backup options and wait for them all to schedule interviews. This would be the beginning of the toughest tests of faith and patience that I had endured since the pivotal moment of my conversion that I told you about last week. I'm gonna get to bed now, and once I arrive at the shipper in the morning, hopefully gonna be able to walk over to the nearest church for Ascension Thursday Mass while they're loading me. Well, Ascension Thursday is a holy day of obligation here in the northeastern states and in Nebraska. So, for a while I was kind of worried that I was going to have a really hard time trying to make it to Mass. By the grace of God, I'm going to be able to get there pretty easily. Even more easily than I would have been able to if everything had gone right today and I had been on the original schedule that I had as of last night. So, everything is grace. Always is, always will be. Till next time, please keep me in your prayers, and I'll keep you in mine. God bless.